Hi, it's Dennis Daly. I've posted over 100 excerpts from some of my more than 250 American montage shows that I did in the 1980s and 90s while at UPI Radio. Recently, I embarked on a fresh series of shows, and here's the second half of one of my new American montage interviews. My special guest is Alan Pitts, the PR guy for ARRL, the American Radio Relay League, the group that all the ham radio operators in the U.S. belong to, or at least most of them do. And Alan, we have talked about the evolution of ham radio. I know in the very beginning, the hams had to make their own sets, sometimes wrapping wire around oatmeal cartons, and then companies started making them. I remember when I first got involved in electronics in the 1960s, there was a company called Heathkit. You could even send away and they would give you the parts to make a television.
They're back.
They're back. Well, I'm glad to hear that. But the ingenuity has always fascinated me. People making the original radios out of oatmeal cartons, and there's still a lot of experimentation going on, I understand.
We've got hams who are even making in tuna fish cans, just to see if they can do it. Then they actually fit an entire radio into an empty can of tuna fish.
Let's move forward. Radio begins to be an industry. There are more and more ham radio operators. Companies are building radios, but there's controversy with the government. So ARRL is there doing lobbying. What arguments or fights has it gotten into over the years?
Well, amateur radio always has been under threat from a number of different business concerns and desires. There is only so much spectrum within the radio bands, and initially, one of the reasons why you heard the broadcast radio or down in the lower frequencies is they thought that was the only actual good or usable frequencies, and that the things that were above it were really not all that worthwhile. They'd never go anyplace. And the amateurs were kind of pushed towards what was called the high frequencies. Well, the interesting part of that is the hams found a very interesting phenomenon in these higher frequencies and realized at the time, it got the term high frequency. They really weren't all that high, but they were for that day. And the hams found out that you do it right and the radio signals ricochet off the ionosphere and literally can go around the world. And all of a sudden now, well, the high frequency, everybody wants to be in on this high frequency because we got worldwide communications. And so hams have been slowly kind of sliding up the bands. We still got high frequency bands in there. But a lot of the new experimentation right now is going up into the higher and higher frequencies, above 400 megahertz into the gigahertz range. And even there, you've got, bluntly, the cell phone companies and other wireless type companies looking at the amateur radio bands as a possible place to see if they can move in and have them reallocated for commercial use. ARRL's biggest function is the protection of the amateur radio spectrum. Without that spectrum, it's like a national resource. It's the only place left where an individual can actually experiment with radio, with wireless communication. There is no more of it. This is it. That's all there is. And the ARRL is one of the biggest things is to defend that small natural resource that's left for the individual to learn wireless communication.
And there is only so much space out there on the radio band. I remember as a kid, you could turn on your FM radio and go around and find empty areas. If you had something amounting to a Mr. Microphone, you could broadcast on it. I would dare anyone who lives in or near a big city to go to their FM radio and try to find a frequency that's not being used.
And there will be more and more and more of this. The world is going wireless. That's one of the reasons why hams are in demand in a lot of places, is that we've got the know-how, we've got the hands-on experience and technology, as more and more applications, appliances, various things are going wireless. I can remember even security locks. You used to lock up your car. Now what do? You hit a little button and you might be 100 feet away and the car goes, "Hi, hello, here I am," and it blinks its light and toots its horn at you. That's wireless. There are more applications, and you need to use more and more spectrum space, because if they don't, they're going to be all over top of one another.
And as much as we hate regulation, government regulation to systematize radio is important. Imagine somebody broadcasts on a garage door frequency. It opens every garage door in the city.
That's happened.
It has?
I've heard a story very much like that I cannot personally document to. But what I can document is when you go into major department stores, there's these little RFID tags that they will put in a product so that you can't walk out the door, without the tag being deactivated. Or we've all had it happen. You walk out the door and all of a sudden, bam, 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 please return back to the cash register, and you set off the alarms. Well, there were actually 2 stores that had set up their systems for these RFID tags. Unfortunately, their systems had a harmonic, a multiple of the frequency they were using, which matched the cars in their parking lot. So people would come and drive in the parking lot, lock their car, go in shopping, come on out, and no matter what they did, they could not unlock their car.
And that is graphic proof of the fact that we need to share the highway. And that highway is the limited amount of radio space that's out there. And by radio, I mean radio, TV, everything else.
This is a problem with spectrum.
Something else that's interesting is over the years, and this shows the great cross-section of people on ham radio bands, there have been some rather famous people who have been hams. And not just comedians.
Depends on how famous you are. If you're talking about something like a Joe Taylor, a Nobel Prize winner, the answer is yeah. If you are talking about somebody, another Joe Walsh, the rock and roll guy, who I absolutely love, the answer is yeah. I do know that there have been monarchs and heads of government and people like Barry Goldwater, Walter Cronkite, and I can name a whole number of them, Patty Loveless. All of them have been hams. But I can't say that I did, but I do know that there are people who have made contact with them, and only after it's all over, they look up the call sign and find out exactly who they were talking to and go, oh, because on the radio, we're all equals. And that's the nice part.
What percentage of hams are female?
Hard really to tell. I'm going to say it's only about 15%.
Of course, there are those women whose husbands had been hams, and they ended up being ham widows, and instead of throwing the equipment away, they learned how to be a ham operator.
Now, I'm speaking, and just from my own personal experience. I don't have hard data on this one, but from my own personal experience, it seems to be harder to get a woman or female involved in amateur radio. But once they do, they are far more likely to be very active hams than the same number of men. They find, first of all, it's empowering. They can do this. Second of all, it's fun. And they like this.
I never became a ham. Worked with a ton of them. Never became a ham. As I mentioned, I got early into CB back when you could talk long distances and everyone followed the rules. And I started meeting some really neat people in my hometown I didn't know. And we'd get together for coffee and donuts and things like that. And I'll tell you what, it opened up a whole new world for me, just CB back then. And for a guy who loves to talk, it was magic.
The best way to learn about amateur radio is to go and find one of the local clubs. Now, I'm going to plug this. There's a website that ARRL has where anybody can find a club in their area. All you got to do is put in your zip code and what range you want to take a look at. It's www.arrl.org/ and one word, find a club. FINDACLUB. So it's ARRL.org/find a club. Any of you can go there, put in your zip code, say I want to look, 20-mile range, and you'll find an amateur radio club. There's approximately 70,000, they think. It's hard to say exactly how many clubs there are, but it's about 70,000 in the United States, so there's got to be one near you.
And from what I understand, not only do these clubs show you what ham's all about, but they're very nurturing. As we talked about earlier, they're really neat, funny people. They can help you figure out what kind of equipment you need to buy, what's in your budget, and I would assume they have a handle on used equipment to make it more affordable to get into ham radio.
This is true. Getting the study materials for the FCC. Now, remember, you got to be licensed for this. But getting at least past that the technician class FCC exam, getting your initial license usually costs less than $40. And if you are with a club or a group, they can point you to where are the ham fests and the shows. And also, they're more than happy to help you of the used equipment. And you can pick up used equipment really cheap. But to pick up which is the good used equipment, which is the best stuff for what you hope to accomplish, the best way to do it is talk to people within an amateur radio club in your area. They're more than happy to show you and lead you and get you started well. It's in their interest. It's in your interest. It's a win-win.
Alan, let's talk about the National Ham Radio Convention held every year in Dayton, Ohio, the Hamvention. I had no idea until I went there for the first time how huge an event this is. Cars parked in the parking lot, each one with about 1,000 antennae on them. Do you know how long that Hamvention's been going on?
I really do not know. I want to say it's approximately 30 years. It just it started out as a normal Hamvention and just kept on growing and growing and growing. And I want to say it's been about 30 years, but I honestly do not know.
And I was surprised to find the number of people there who were ham radio operators from every point of the compass. I mean, all over the world. And also, it was a great place to find really affordable stuff. Not just ham radio, but telephone and a lot of other things. I mean, if you're in that area or can afford it, going to that Hamvention is like going to the Mecca of communications.
Oh, yeah. It's me and several thousand of my best friends and stuff that you never knew you needed, but now you can't live without. It's great. And it's much, much bigger than anybody might. Take whatever, if you haven't been there, take whatever you imagine and quadruple it.
And I think one of the great things about ham radio is not only are there more and more hams out there to help you, there are more and more festivals and conventions where you can find the equipment you need. And in this digital age, a lot of the ham radio equipment, unlike the ones of decades ago where you practically had to put them together, they're very, very simple to use.
A lot of it is very consumer friendly in that sense. Let me go back to the code because there's an interesting phenomenon that has happened there. A couple of years ago, when the FCC was talking about they were going to be dropping the requirement for Morse code to get your amateur radio license, a lot of people were really, really upset. Oh, this is going to be a horrible thing. This will be the death of any Morse code usage. They're turning amateur radio into citizens band radio. There was a whole lot of arguments that were raised. And the ARRL kind of, I got to admit, I was part of this, sat back in some ways and smiled and said, we're not going to get upset about this. We want people to learn code. We want people to know Morse code. But at the same time, we're not going to panic. And the reason for that is we saw what had already happened in Europe. Europeans had dropped the requirement for Morse code long before we did. And I made a prediction at the time, and it came true. Do you happen to remember the story of Tom Sawyer whitewashing Aunt Polly's fence? Aunt Polly has this fence, and Tom Sawyer has to be whitewashing the fence, and it was a chore, and he absolutely hated it. But he came up with a strange idea, and he pretended as if he loved doing this. This was fun. And the next thing you know, the kids come on down the street, and, hey, Tom, what you doing? Oh, I'm whitewashing the fence. What do you mean you're whitewashing? Oh, this is fun. This is good. And he's got the neighborhood kids now actually paying him to allow them to whitewash the fence for Tom. Well, that's kind of what happened with Morse code. When it was a requirement, yeah, people would learn it. Some people would really do it, but most people, it was just kind of, when it turned into something that was purely voluntary, you do it for the art form, you do it for the love of it. Morse code usage went up, not down.
And don't a lot of people like code because it will break through in bad weather where a human voice won't?
That is still true. It's not so much weather conditions, it's the amount of background static that may be going on at the time, or ionospheric conditions, not the kind of weather that you can see. But at the same time, digital signals, as people with digital televisions over the air have found, is an all or nothing. You either have the signal or you don't. There's no fade out. It's either on or off. Voice signals and other type of signals can fade out, and it becomes, you're not sure what you may be saying. But the Morse code, that cuts through even the background static noises. Very easy. And you will be able to, oh, hello, and be able to say and understand that even when there is a high level of background noise and background static on the thing. And that can be caused by thunderstorms, anything that's giving off electrical discharge. Morse code's got a better chance of cutting it.
Alan, even though we don't think of ham radio, or most of us would not think of ham radio and the Internet in the same breath, I understand that the coming of the Internet has brought some really big changes and new opportunities to ham radio operators. Has it not?
We have fun with it. There's a whole thing called Echolink, which is really an interesting hybrid between radio and the Internet. It allows me to use a VHF radio that's a little bigger than a pack of cigarettes. I may be talking on the radio. I'm out in the parking lot someplace, and I'm talking on the radio. It goes into one of the repeaters within about 20 miles of me. And from the repeater, it goes out and drops down onto the Internet. From there, it pops out at someplace like, I don't know, I'll say Ayers Rock in Australia. From a Internet there, back into a radio, and then is transmitted again by radio to somebody who's riding along in a Range Rover within 20 miles and maybe camping out in the middle of nowhere's Australia. Now, I'm doing this with nothing more than a small radio about the size of a pack of cigarettes. It's called Echolink. It's a neat system where it's this hybrid between Internet and radio, and we're developing more and more of that. Plus, we're also developing a non-dependence on the Internet, much like I was talking before about this mesh network, where if the Internet is down, hams are still up. Hams are able to do this. There's a D-Star network, which is able to transmit digital voice and data, again, using either Internet if it's there or radio if it's not. And all of this is being developed by amateur radio people. We're not dependent on the Internet, but we like it. It's fun.
Well, and I remember a time when hams were playing around with television. I mean, the picture was sometimes a slow scanning rate. It was green and black, or all kinds of different combinations. But yet it was something hams were doing that was new and innovative, and it was a tremendously exciting thing.
Oh, yeah. Amateur radio people are playing with the slow scan and regular television. Anything to deal with wireless communication, you're going to find a ham playing with it.
Alan Pitts, let us go back to what we talked about earlier. You are there at the American Radio Relay League in Newington, Connecticut, and you're a spokesperson for this umbrella organization that tries to help and enhance ham radio. And I know you want very much to have new people join. They don't have to be young people, just anybody, any walk of life. I was suggesting that they go to the local radio station because almost every radio station engineer is a ham radio operator, but you knock on the door of a lot of radio stations anymore, you're going to find that there's nobody there. There's so much unattended satellite-delivered radio, but still, if you check around with the communications people in your hometown, or if you still have a radio station that has an approachable staff, I think that's a great place to start to find information about ham radio.
Well, there's two ways to find. Like I said, the Find a Club website has been very, very helpful for people. If you can't remember that one, just remember Hello Radio. Just simply helloradio.org.com, whatever. It'll bring you on into one of the ARRL's websites, which is set up to help people who are curious and interested about amateur radio but don't really know where to start. And it will give you a lot of information and very clear links as to where to go and how to do it.
Alan, this has been great fun. I want to thank you for taking an hour out of your busy day there. And as ham radio operators say, I wish you 73s.
Best regards, which is 73s. Hams have their own short, but 73s to you also. And thank you very much from myself and from ARRL.
I hope you enjoyed this interview from my new American Montage series. Check out YouTube for more. I'm Dennis Daly.